Hey everybody, Coach Glenn Haddam here, and I'm here with the AMPLIFY podcast, and I have a special guest, Chris Warner, here today. And before we jump into our conversation, just want to let you know that I am getting ready for the Great World Race coming up in less than 3 weeks now, and where I'll be actually going to Cape Town, and from there I'm going to start my first marathon. I'll be running a marathon actually in Antarctica. And so from the cold weather there, I'll be shooting back to Cape Town for the second marathon the next day, and then off to Perth, Australia, Abu Dhabi next, Portugal, and then Cartagena for some heat and humidity, and then finishing off in Miami. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but for the most part, we're going to jump into my special guest, Chris, and why I have him here to advise a little bit on some take homes for leadership and how athleticism really applies to all facets of life. And this guy is operating at the highest level. Someone I consider a great friend and inspiration for me doing knucklehead things like this. And so Chris is the second American to summit all 14 of the world's highest peaks. Been on that journey for about 24 years and finished off the last one in 2023, if I have that right. And he's an accomplished mountaineer, entrepreneur, and leadership expert. And we'll learn how to what extent that is. Which is, he founded Earth Treks, which is a first national chain of indoor climbing gyms back in 1990. And I was just still getting out of high school. And Chris, like, what drives you to accomplish at such a high level and take such, what the ordinary person would say is like such incredible risks in order to break through and do these seemingly impossible things? There's these barriers that most of us have, and yet you thrive in these spaces.
Wow. I think really curiosity, Glenn. I'm just always want to know what's around the next corner. And which is a great thing in mountaineering, right? Because you're always you're always going into the unknown, which is such a fun place for me to be. But there was the same thing with my entrepreneurial journey. It's like, okay, what it's going to be around the next corner. And to get around the next corner, you had to go through a process to do that, which meant, you had to learn new skills. You had to prepare yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally for the challenge that was going to be ahead of you. You had to learn how to build teams. You had to learn how to, get that team to be motivated towards a strategic goal. There's a whole group of skills that you had to acquire to just be able to do that. So it was this curiosity to just keep learning and, so that I could explore what was around the next corner that led me to, accomplish all these little fun things.
Yeah, and I assume when just like myself, when I'm embarking on this adventure, there's a lot of costs associated, not just financially, but
Yep.
time-wise and money-wise, but there's costs to, you're choosing a certain bucket that's going to require, you can't have like
Yep.
five hardcore buckets going at the same time. So maybe talk a little bit about the getting out of balance act part of it, where you have to thrust energy forth in one direction and prioritize, shift your priorities for a time.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about entrepreneurism when I got started back in the early 90s
Yeah.
was that the cult of entrepreneurism back then was about bootstrapping. So you never could properly fund anything, with other people's money. You had to figure out how to do it through sweat equity and, chutzpah and, creativity.
Mhm.
So that whole approach, in fact, I started my business with $592 and then grew it into something that was worth, tens of millions of dollars. So, we came from an era, even just like within my climbing, I was a dirtbag climber. I lived in my car for 2 years. Now they call it van life. Back then you were just a dirtbag, right? Or
Right.
homeless. So it was, we were used to, like, our community just revered people who could pull the rabbit out of the hat, who could take, a nickel and turn it into $10. That was what we were all about. And it's a skill that once you acquire it and perfect it, you can just use in all of these different opportunities, whether it's, funding an expedition or funding a business or funding your personal life, funding your retirement. All of these things are connected together. It's just an understanding of how to, you know, how to make the most with the least.
Yeah, and I'm assuming once you master that operating mechanism, that translates to a lot of aspects of life.
100%. It's funny, like, there's a lot of responsibilities that a CEO has. And I had 1,000 employees. We built the first national chain of indoor climbing gyms. But a CEO's job is to take $1 and turn it into $3. And that's most business people, when you hang around with them, realize, oh my God, they took $1 and turned it into $1.10. Well, $1.10 is like, okay, inflation and finance fees alone ate up all that. So now I have no profit left to solve these problems. So it is a mindset on how to do that. And it goes back to your very first question. It's like, okay, do you have the curiosity to figure this out? Are you willing to constantly learn, new skills to apply it to an ever more complex set of problems that you're going to face?
Yeah, and how does that also apply, I guess, raising a daughter, and getting them launched correctly, and like how might that, carry over as well? So
You're 100% right. So, I think it takes a village to raise a child. And, you're expecting that their teachers are going to, not only just teach them math, but teach them how to be part of a community of a classroom. Right.
right.
And, I think as a father, one of my greatest things that I tried to teach my daughter was this concept called self-efficacy. When you fall down, can you get back up again, and face the same, challenge? And I believe that, she has a high amount of self-efficacy, and that is totally needed. I mean, it's amazing to watch, teenagers and young adults in this era. It is a lot harder than it was for us growing up,
Yeah.
and they face a lot more rejection than we do. Even though I was the last of the baby boomers, right? Because baby boom ended in September of 64 and I was born in July of 64. We were always competing for a spot. We were competing for a spot on sports teams. We were competing for a spot in jobs, everything else. But we didn't have the amount of rejection that seems to be built into so much in society today. So it was an easier time to be able to fail and pull yourself back up again than it is today.
Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about your, I guess, a little bit of the continuum, some of the, from being a dirtbag climber to some of
Yeah.
your first kind of extraordinary feats that maybe a memorable adventure that you're proud of or that you survived, and then how it kind of has grew into this extraordinary feat. And I think we think about, okay, climbed all the highest peaks in the world, great accomplishment, but there's a messy journey along the way over, several decades.
Yeah. Well, actually, we could just keep to just that one topic about it. So
Yeah.
I I am the second American to have climbed the 14 tallest peaks in the world. All of these peaks are above this magical height called 8,000 meters or
Yep.
26,240 feet. And
What's that like
there's
equivalent of for people who don't really get that? Like, what's that like? Because it sounds like the moon
It
for
is the moon.
normal folks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, it's very funny. So when I had become the ninth American to have summited K2 in Everest, there was actually more Americans that had done that than had stood on the moon, right? So that's how rare that feat was back then.
Mhm.
And obviously there's more Americans that have stood on the moon than have climbed all 14 8,000 meter peaks. So that it is a pretty funny analogy that you just put out there. But
Yeah.
the journey to climbing all those peaks was, it took me 4 years and 28 expeditions to accomplish that goal. And so it wasn't just like each one was a given. In fact,
Yeah.
I was on a peak called K2, 3 different expeditions before we finally summited. I was on this peak called Nanga Parbat 4 times before I finally summited. And each of these expeditions are expensive, not just in money, but also in time. When we would go off to K2, especially back, what I call the old days, we would be 2 to 3 months away from home. The longest expedition I ever was on was 89 days door to door. And that was
Wow.
the year that we finally summited K2. So, you're away if you're away for 90 days, I literally left home at 205 and came back at 155. So I gave up 50 pounds, and you can just imagine what that did to your health. And it also cost us, a boatload of money for a dirtbag climber. So those are the kind of sacrifices we were willing to make. And quite often you didn't succeed, right? I had a 50% success ratio over this, 24-year period. So it would be easy to have stopped to say, okay, enough is enough. I've, banged my head against this wall. I've ruined my bank account. Like it's affected all sorts of aspects of my life. But it was just something that I was just so into. And the reason I was so into it was because it gave me so much back. We have this saying in mountaineering, don't reach the peak, but miss the point. So I wasn't going off to climb, Everest or K2 just to stand on the summit. I was doing it because it was an inner journey. It was something that was feeding my soul. It's what made me, I believe, better in all the things that are important in life. It made me better at building a business. It made me better as a dad. It made me better as a friend. It made me better in trying to, fight for the needy because I had endured so much in that process.
Yeah,
And
and
that's,
that forging yourself in the fire of, moving towards, a elusive goal at times, and then you've got to deal with tragedies. And I think I talked to you when you had just set the record right afterwards,
mm-hmm,
there's the celebration of it, and then there was also some loss of
yeah,
some young women that at the same time. And
yeah.
I'm assuming that when these accidents or high risk situations with weather rolling in, you have to move away from the mission's shifted. You have to pivot.
Yeah, well, it's obviously high altitude mountaineering is a deadly sport. And I have had so many friends that have lost their lives. And I've actually held five people when they died in my hand, or yeah, five people died in my hand. So, I get it. I totally get the consequence, and I get what we're playing for up there. We're playing with our lives up there. But there's a reason I think that I'm alive after all these expeditions. I've been on actually over 230 international mountaineering expeditions. And I think the reason I'm alive is because I'm willing to turn around. Like I don't, I spend a lot, I'm very risk conservative, and I would rather fail, you know, pout my way home and then get an opportunity to come back and try again than just force something to happen. The definition of arrogance is the belief that the rules don't apply to you. And in mountaineering, the rules totally apply. It is non-discriminatory in who it kills. Sadly, most of the time in the mountains, people kill themselves in the mountains. The mountains don't kill them. The top four reasons why people die is because of human error. It's not because of avalanches. It's not because of rockfall. It's human error. They made a critical mistake that cost them their lives.
I used to coach Robert Redford back in the days, and one of my first clients, and he did this beautiful movie. I don't know if you saw that movie where he's out on a boat and he has to deal with a hole that gets created in the side of the boat, and he has to repair it, and it's like you're watching his mind because there's no talking throughout the film
Mm-hmm.
other than one F-bomb, I think, but he's having to quickly navigate through. I've got to make quick decisions.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you've done all this preparatory work on that mind piece as a very important component to know if this occurs, you know, you just switch gears and you got to make decisions very fast in
Yep.
those times, like very fast. So I'm assuming there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for, all conditions perfect or, the opposite.
Yeah. And I think, okay, there's two things I'm going to talk about right
Yeah.
on this topic about this whole kind of idea of preparation. One is, I'm a big believer in this old saying that bad experiences teach good judgment. And that requires reflection, right? So something happens, you have to take the time to reflect on it to learn. And, I've worked a lot with special ops teams and professional sports teams. And the great thing about those two groups is they spend a lot of time reflecting. So you play a football game on Sunday, and then Monday you're looking at game tape to learn what
Right.
you did wrong or well on Monday. And
Mhm.
then you're now practicing for the next thing. But it always starts with reflection. And the same thing with special ops and covert ops teams. When they were, planning to get bin Laden, they built a mock of that compound and then trained in that mock compound before they went to the real thing, right? With observers overhead. If you've ever been into any kind of like a SWAT team training ground or whatever, they have these great catwalks overhead, and so people come in and there's observers, and then they're able to coach you on how to learn from the mistakes that you made or highlight the things that you do really well. So reflection is critical. In fact, when you look at high performance business groups, if you take the time to have after action reviews or debriefs or team meetings after every single major event, you will actually be 20 to 25% more profitable than your peers, right? So it's that reflection that's so critical. So that's one point. The second point is, what does all this experience get you? Like, how does it make you a more valuable person? And there is there was a psychotherapist. He was a kid when this happened, but he became a psychotherapist and then a college professor. And he was in a concentration camp as a kid, as a young man. And when he got out, he studied the concept of altruism. He had seen, and this is not Viktor Frankl, it's a different person, but
Yeah.
so this altruism is different than heroism. It's yes, it's sacrificial. Like, I'm making a sacrifice of myself, my comfort, etc. for you, but I'm just trying to do something to help you make your life a little bit better. Like, it's my effort helping you. And if you are driving, what he wanted to know, what makes somebody altruistic. So imagine you're driving down a highway at 70 miles an hour,
Okay.
and you see an older woman with a flat tire. Even though you're going 70 miles an hour, you have a split second to decide, should I pull over and help? And
Right.
chances are you're going to pull over and help, because you know what to do. You know how to change a tire, right? And even if you don't know how to change a tire, you know how to comfort this woman and make her feel secure while she's standing on the highway with, tractor trailers buzzing by. If you were driving down the same highway and you
So
saw,
20-year-old is not as altruistic, right?
well,
Right.
no, so let me just finish the analogy, and we'll go into analyzing the why behind this.
Yeah.
If you were going down a highway and you saw a Harley Davidson driver, with his big leather vest on and stuff with a flat tire,
Mhm.
you're not going to stop, because that guy, he doesn't need your hug to feel comfortable on the side of the road, right? And he probably knows better how to change his own spare tire than you do. In fact, you don't even have a spare Harley tire in the back of your truck.
Right.
So the whole thing is, in it's experiences. If I have had a variety of intense experiences that demanded the most of me, overcoming obstacles and stressful situations, I have the ability to solve more problems. And because I have the ability to solve more problems, I'm now able to be more altruistic. I'm able to now stop more often and help others in need, because I have a bigger skill set. So, those two things, right? This whole idea of like, okay, let's have bad experiences teach us good judgment, so that we can learn and become more profitable, achieve more things, right? Defeat our opponents in next Saturday's game. That's one of them. But it's also like, how do we just make us a better person in serving others, right? How does it make us more altruistic?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in, we fill our own cups and then everyone gets the benefit of catching the overflow. But that's actually that's the reason.
Yes,
The
yes, it
reason is
is.
to serve.
Yeah, yeah. That's why you want to do this, right? Like, you and I have the same thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
we're a little bit on the pathological side when it comes to goal setting, but we both like bringing back what we've learned to life back at home.
100%. So 100%. Yeah, and it's going through that stretch period. So when you look at the logistics of your stretch, there's still a level of intelligence going on to it. It's not like someone who we've all seen the guy who walks across the Twin Towers. It's not like he
Yeah,
started there and let's just see how this goes. He started in a park at one time, a few feet off the ground, and then graduated to maybe one story. And so when how do you when you make these big what looks like leaps to other folks, how do you make those sensible constructions of an actual plan of action that's going to, like reverse engineering how you're going to go
yes.
about doing something sensibly? What goes into your process? You're organizing your thoughts and coming up with, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna set some some edgy but realistic deadlines, and we've got to assemble the support and the resources. When you start to pull all this together, what what kind of goes into that to putting together what you would consider for yourself? This is sensible. This
Yeah.
extraordinary thing can be brought down to the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an old saying in climbing, there's old climbers and bold climbers. There's just
Old
no old,
boulders.
bold climbers, right?
No, old
So,
boulders.
yeah. And you see the same thing when you work with, like, say, special ops teams, that there's guys who rely on brawn and there's guys who rely on brains.
Mhm,
And the guys who are the brain guys have much longer careers.
mhm,
You can only bash through so many doors before you get hurt or killed. And my super strength, if anything, is really that I've always been more of a brains than a brawn guy. In fact, I have, like, I don't know if I have a single fast twitch muscle fiber, right? Like, I can go forever, but I can't go forever fast, or I can't go forever sideways. Like, I'm just, and it's, so I've had to use my mind to overcome, these other limitations that I have. And so things like being able to envision, the challenges and prepare for them is critical in that. It's really what's ultimately, the behind the success of in the business. One of the things about being more intellectually driven is you realize that you know your weaknesses. And since I knew what my weaknesses were, I knew I had to create amazing, or a network of amazing mentors. And I still have, I'd say, four of my best friends have been mentors for me for, some of them 30 plus years.
yeah,
And
I would
they're
agree
all a
with that.
little,
I have the same. Yeah,
yeah, they're all a little bit older than me. They were always, you know, facing bigger challenges than I was. So I was always able to learn from them as they were overcoming these things. And, the ability to, I don't know how people get through life without having somebody they can call at 4 a.m. and discuss their problems.
yeah.
That's ultimately,
Yeah, it's really important to have that real time access to thrash and bounce some items off the on the whiteboard and see if they're too far fetched, or they can be brought down to those micro adjustments that need to happen in order to put them into real world application like
yeah.
quickly.
And if you
Quickly.
if you are cursed with thinking that you're smarter than everybody, you're in big trouble. Like,
Right.
you're definitely leaving profit on the table, right? So it's like, okay, how do I have, I'm preparing for this conversation, I'm negotiating a lease, I'm negotiating a loan, I'm negotiating a sale of my business, whatever it happens to be. It's like, okay, well, who did I go to for my, to have those conversations so that I could, maximize my return?
Yeah.
If I relied on myself, I'm going to miss things. And
Yeah, I
that's,
think the outward appearance is this bold character, but behind the scenes that most people don't see is that you're having those calls and you're asking those
yeah,
questions and you're doing a lot of research and you're testing things, out and making those adjustments, a lot of adjustments from what you initially thought you were gonna, at least start it off with. So,
yeah. And then you share the journey with all these other people, which
yeah,
is so much fun,
yeah,
right? Like, they have your back and they're there to celebrate with you when it's all over. Like,
yeah.
that's the joy of the process.
I,
In
I,
the end, you know what? Look, on our deathbed, we want to be surrounded by friends, not trophies.
right.
And how do we earn those friends? It's the same thing with asking for help from others, right? We love to give of ourselves to others. That's just we get joy from that.
Yeah.
That means we have to give other people the opportunity to experience joy, right? We have to ask other people for help because they're going to have the sense of joy when they help us.
Yeah, and also I think, surround yourself with, I always say surround yourself with people that will say no and challenge and push
Yes.
back. Not a bunch of I don't have a lot of yes people around me. I have a lot of people who really put me to the fire, and that creates a great level of deeper connection and trust. And those friendships are greatly valued and appreciated. And they're messy at times, but they're high value. So
Yeah, we were unbelievably successful as a business. Like, if you just look at our peer group in our industry, and a big part of that was because the team that we had created over time was so excellent on pushing back against you know brilliant ideas, and
yeah,
I loved it when my staff would come to me and say, Warner, that's a really creative idea, but it's really a bad idea. Like it's impossible to execute or whatever it happens to be. And that was a big part of our thing was them telling me no. Like, yeah, your bright idea isn't really that bright, actually. And
Yeah,
for
you've
me, it was
told me that a
great.
few times.
Yeah, yeah, which is good. You need somebody to do that for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I know folks can get your book High Altitude Leadership at Amazon, right? They can grab that
Mm-hmm.
book. But tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about, since we want to share inspiration with folks, tell us a little bit about your movie and how they can go, where they can find that, and tell us a little bit about. I mean, this has gotten some Emmy awards, and
Yeah, I've done a lot of film work over the years, but one of the coolest projects I ever did was a documentary about climbing K2.
mhm.
And we filmed it for NBC and we're nominated for 6 Emmys, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, you can go onto YouTube and find it. Just search for the Shared Summits K2 Expedition.
Okay, shared
And
summit K2 expedition, and
yeah,
that's free on YouTube. Okay, great.
yes, 45 minutes of just, pleasure. You can go watch it. So actually it's a great, it was kind of in the Blair Witch era. So it was just three knuckleheads getting the crap kicked out of them. So
But
yeah.
no mystery person kicking the crap out of us. These guys are clearly doing it to themselves.
Yeah, it was great. It was, it was us against nature. And nature, constantly had the upper hand.
Yeah. Well, any like last words of advice for myself going on the Great World Race that might be useful to the folks at home in their world because I'm embarking on this journey. I've been on
Yeah.
this journey for some time now. What might be a few nuggets because I always listen to I hold on to every little nugget you share. So
All right. So I'm just going to tell you from my personal experience. So when you would be climbing these big peaks, some of them literally, I did 34-hour, base camp to the summit, nonstop things, lots of like super endurance events.
yeah.
And what always helped me
Hmm.
was looking up. Don't just look at your feet. Just look up and look around and just say, oh my goodness, I can't believe where I am right now. This is the coolest place ever.
Yeah.
We were, one of the coolest things in mountaineering is that you start climbs in the night. And so, you're hopefully in a star filled, sky.
Hmm.
And man, every time, like at night, you have your headlamp on. And so there's a beam of light and you're so used to looking down and looking, a couple of feet ahead and learning how to teaching yourself how to pace up this different slopes, et cetera, et cetera. But boy, every time I would look up, I'd be like, oh my goodness, the sky is amazing. It's filled with these beautiful clouds, like or stars. Like, why are you here?
Right.
It's the setting. Like, enjoy the setting. So when your head starts to go to the wrong place, just look up and
Yeah.
just take in the setting.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, I don't want to go to Antarctica and be like, oh, I missed it. I was busy running.
Yeah, I spent I climbed the highest peak in Antarctica, and after we summited, a big storm came in. It was a 500-year storm that shut down all of Antarctica. There's no flights in or out, et cetera. And we were trapped in tents for 11 days.
Wow.
We missed Christmas. We almost missed New Year's. And I got to tell